Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. It is Q&A time. So we got two Q&As. Part one is obviously what we're watching now. I guess on the channel we had like a monthly recap of 6500 XT and RTX 3050 stuff. So if you missed that, check it out. But yeah, in that one we explained that we're obviously at my place, my studio, and this is one of my sets. Not finished yet, so there's a few lighting tweaks and things we have to do. But Tim and I thought, why not just sit here and do the Q&As here rather than the regular set, which is just over there. So we reached out to you guys as we do on the YouTube community tab, as well as the Patreon members and Float Play members on Discord. Hit us with some questions and we'll come up with some answers. So that's what we're about to do. So let's go get into it. But actually, before we do,
today's video is brought to you by Gigabyte and their range of laptops powered by NVIDIA RTX 30 series graphics. Whether you choose an Aorus laptop for high-end gaming or an Aero laptop for gaming and creating on the go, GeForce GPUs provide the performance you need. The Aero 15 line is a favourite of mine with its gorgeous 4K OLED display, but hardcore gamers will love the fast refresh rates on offer with Aorus laptops as well. Gigabyte's laptops come with GPUs from the RTX 3060 to the beastly RTX 3080 and are available in 15 and 17-inch sizes. Click the link in the description to learn more.
Tim. Yes, you. A few brands announced OLED gaming focused monitors like Alienware's ultrawide due out in March. What features are you most looking forward to seeing on these monitors? How long before you think these displays become the go-to for gamers?
Well,
I'd like one.
I think the go-to for gamers is probably quite a way off. I'm not expecting them to be particularly affordable. I'm thinking thousands of dollars. So if we're talking go-to for gamers, yeah, maybe 5 years plus on that one. But as for the features, yeah, looking forward to seeing, well, really just the evolution of HDR gaming for PCs. It feels like this whole time, I'm sitting here, it's like HDR gaming. Wouldn't that be great on PC? And then there's like 3-4 monitors that you can choose from, and they're all stupidly expensive. This, of course, is probably still going to be expensive, but it's probably going to be significantly better quality. Much better local dimming because it's per pixel lit, much better response times. I think it's really going to accelerate that market. So that's what I'm excited to look out for, and just, yeah, finally getting something new to talk about, something that's good, hopefully, something that is a bit different to what we've got. And yeah, so I'm keen. I'm really keen.
Yeah,
really keen.
I'm keen to see it.
I just saw Gamers Nexus talk about Biostar and colourful B660 boards, and the pictures look like at least some effort was put into the design. Would you be interested in reviewing those to see whether they're any good or not?
They have some nice colourful heat sinks or something. Yeah, I think the problem with those boards isn't necessarily the features of the board design. Well, they can be questionable at times. For me, whenever I've bought those boards from the lesser known companies, the big problem for me has always been the BIOS. Not just the actual BIOS itself, but also BIOS support, I suppose. But the BIOS itself looks like something we were running on motherboards 15 years ago. Very limited features, difficult to enable things that are really basic like XMP. So very clunky BIOSes, and then generally not updated as regularly as what you would see with like MSI, Asus, Gigabyte and so on.
Yeah, and the availability of those boards is a lot less in most regions than you'd see from the big four.
Yes,
so
I'm not even sure if we can get them, but
yeah. So again, like the interest on a Biostar or colourful board, unless it was some dangerously bad catching on fire board or some absolute garbage product that you could make into a fun, amusing video. Again, I don't think most people are going out and buying Biostar boards, especially in like European or North American regions.
No, I got my hands on the last generation of boards and they were not good. So, not good from any aspect. VRM performance was terrible, and yeah, as I said, the BIOSes were very janky, so not worth the small saving you get by avoiding MSI or Asus or whatever. All right, quite an interesting, I like these sort of interesting general sort of questions that probably will interest the vast majority of the audience. So, what are the manufacturer's responses typically behind the scenes when bringing up issues you discover / bring to them? Gratitude or cold shoulder or cold-shouldered? I think because generally speaking, we don't have direct line of communication, at least always, because there's no point like with the engineers or whatever. Some of the companies we have access to those people, but generally when getting samples and dealing with any issues, we have like a PR type contact. And I would say by and large, sort of the initial response is generally a bit denial, like, oh, that's probably not a problem, or oh no, we've fixed that, or we've tested that, or something along those lines. And it's kind of annoying because then you have to waste time back and forth with them sort of really trying to make it clear what the problem is, and then finally get them to get someone knowledgeable on the technical aspect of it to look into it and see if they can replicate it or if it is a problem. And as an example, this happens a lot with motherboards. You know, XMP on I think it might have even been some Z690 motherboards. Loading XMP didn't work with any of the memory I had. You just load it, it does the reboot loop thing, and then resets to BIOS defaults. And they just hadn't properly tested XMP of all things. They tested like one memory kit they had in-house, and they didn't have time to validate other memory kits. We had to wait a couple of days. But initially it was, oh no, we've tested, you know, all the typical sort of kits that you'd be using. We validated the kit you have, and the PR person was adamant about that. And then you're back and forth the next day. Oh, actually, we found a problem. And then you wait and the BIOS update comes out. So I'd say denial is typically how that stuff goes. And then if you get to the right people or they finally work out what it is, you get a bit of headway. I
think that's mirrored a lot of my interactions as well. I think the first thing that comes to mind when I read this question was delays. Like it's always, if there is a solution, it's always like, we've got a fix for this in the works, or we're going to fix this, or the next firmware update will fix this. No time on that statement whatsoever. Just
that's annoying.
At some point in the future, we will look into this and fix it. And again, as you say, a lot of denials and sort of, maybe they bring back some, like I've gotten a few times bring up an issue and they've sent it to an engineer, they bring back a technical report trying to like disprove my testing or something along those lines. And I'm like, but you didn't actually test exactly what I was testing.
The worst examples.
You tested something slightly wrong, or you didn't actually replicate how I was testing or whatever. So I think, it's rare to get a company sort of say, please hide this, or this is terrible, or what are you doing, or we're banishing you from review samples or whatever. That only happens from sometimes after publishing, and even then it's rare.
Yeah, it's rare.
But gratitude, sometimes companies will claim that they're sort of grateful that you've brought up an issue that needs to be fixed, but it's kind of, are they telling the truth?
I mean, you're just making their job harder.
Yeah, you're giving the engineers work to fix problems and stuff, and
potentially it's a bad look for the company, and there can be all other ramifications, like when we found the Asus coolers falling off the Strix cards. That was the cooling performance of those cards was much weaker than expected, and it depended on how you had the card mounted. There's a whole history to it. But I went to Asus and I said, gee, the card seems like it's running a lot hotter. And they said, oh, we think it's a problem with the BIOS. It's using too much power. I said, oh, okay, that makes sense. They've got to tune the voltage, yada, yada, yada. Waited for a BIOS. It didn't come, and it dragged out months. And then we reinvestigated, and a few other, actually credit to PC enthusiasts who worked out that it was a mounting pressure issue. Then we looked into it a bit closer and found out that the cooler was falling off due to the weight, and it didn't have the appropriate loading mechanism. And so they basically stalled that one for months.
Yeah, there's been a few times as well where I've sort of inquired about certain issues or problems. It might not even be something that I'm testing. It might be like, you see a Reddit post of someone claiming like, hey, I've had this issue, and I shoot out a message to the company, see what's going on. A lot of the time that just goes nowhere, or goes into the, we're looking into this, and then into the junk or delete folder on that correspondence. And so those can be frustrating, but I think, a lot of the time it does end up getting resolved one way or another, but I can't say that it's easy.
It's usually a lot of time and effort.
Yeah. Jeremy from our Discord community asks, should we be worried that the GPU prices won't go down, and that we'll be seeing ourselves paying $300 at least in the near future for 50-tier GPU, just because companies are seeing how much we're willing to get utterly shafted for those sweet, juicy FPS? Again, this is all, as we talked about a number of times in the past, it's all a supply and demand situation. So if people stop buying those cards and get fed up, then again, they're not going to be able to sell them at that price, and prices will come down. So I guess it's really on the consumers to sort of set and dictate what people are willing to spend. Obviously, part of that these days is some people buy GPUs for mining, so that changes the equation a little bit. But if people are willing to pay $300 for a 50-tier card, then 50-tier cards will continue being $300. So it's all about what people want to pay and are willing to pay.
Yeah, that's right. But I think it's I think it's fair to say at the top end, the flagship, the high-end stuff, you shafted. That's locked in now.
Yeah.
That shafting has happened, and it's going to continue to happen.
Yeah, that 10% gain for 100% more price, that's not going away.
That's a thing now. Everything you've asked in that question really applies to the high-end. As for the low-end stuff, bit of an unknown. Because during more normal times, there's obviously a volume of cards they want to be able to sell as well. So the high end, it's about those high margins, low volume stuff. So that's fine.
They want to make the most money.
Yeah, that's sort of fixed in at this point. But the low end, where they really want to shift a lot of inventory, whether they can do that at those inflated prices seems doubtful. So they may have to continue to be once again competitive there and offer some good quality products. Supply and demand thing, as Tim said. So I expect that it will improve quite significantly at the low end.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting another competitor into at least, the expectation is at least the mid-range and lower. Like whether or not Intel delivers a 3090 type product is yet to be seen, and the rumors are suggesting probably not. But the competition in that lower range with a third company creating GPUs is going to cause things to adjust as well. But I think the key thing for this lower tier market is that there needs to be either supply parity or an oversupply of cards. You need GPUs sitting on store shelves. If they're not sitting on store shelves, you will never see $200 GPUs again.
Yep.
Because the whole thing that we've seen previously with cards coming out like RX 580s at $200, 1650 Supers, whatever, is that all their other cards, they're out on the market for a while. The high-end, high-margin cards, they're available. You can buy them on shelves at the expected price. Everything's going swimmingly. So NVIDIA, AMD, they want to access a new market. They want to say, oh, well, everyone that is willing to spend $400 has spent $400. Now let's go to the people that can only spend $300 and go and spend $200. So that as long as there's people that are only willing to spend $200 and not $300 or $400 or whatever, that market is always going to exist. But it's obviously a question of, in the current market conditions of the time, does it make sense servicing that market? And for the past year, it has made no sense because you would supply everything to the super expensive products. So again, there's a lot of questions here because we're sort of talking about an unknown time. Like we don't know in the future whether this will ever reach supply parity again. But if we look at a range of other components for building PCs, there's no indication that it's impossible for motherboards or CPUs or storage to be priced at, relatively normal prices.
Yeah, which was the worry a year ago.
Yes.
So I fully expect the $200 market segment to get really competitive again.
Yeah.
But we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and if they're not producing compelling products in that market, and people are just buying Xbox Series S's for $200 or $250 or however much it costs, then that's going to be a loss for a company like NVIDIA because they're not involved with making the Xbox, so they're not making any money from those.
Could even be a loss for AMD
buyers
as well, because there's nothing to say they don't make higher margins on the $200 GPU.
Yeah, exactly. So they're going to want to service those buyers, and in the past they've serviced price points down to like $80. So again, it's going to require a lot of supply and stuff, which is not possible right now, but. Yeah, I don't think it's a dead market.
No, I'm hopeful we'll see competition return there. Okay, this is, I think, one of those interesting what-if questions, Tim. Would you prefer a 6500 XT you can buy that is a holdover GPU until prices become more normal, or a non-existent RTX 3050 at over $400? So, I mean, it's kind of weird that for the non-existent part we get the price right. Is it? Can you buy it for $400 or is it non-existent period?
Yeah, I don't know.
And then what price is the 6500 XT? Is it the current retail price, which is about $270 US? So if you're saying, would I want a 6500 XT at $270 US or a 3050 at $400? Very obviously the 3050. I would take that, but I'm not sure what you mean by non-existent. Is it just like the 3050 is just completely unavailable and you can't buy it at any price?
Maybe it's talking about it's going to cost you a lot more to buy a 3050 over the MSRP. Would you spend, say, $500 versus $250 or whatever on a 6500?
Yeah, so as I said, I pretty much answered this. Well, I answered that question in my review. I said, if the 3050 ends up being $500 and the 6500 XT is the $270, I still think in the long run there's more value spending $500 on the RTX 3050, but I strongly recommend not doing that.
Yep.
Like, I don't recommend buying either product. Really get like an RX 6600 for $400 if you must. Otherwise, secondhand. And I mean, I made that clear in the video. So, I mean, I don't know if the question is would you buy a 6500 XT or nothing? I think is the question ultimately.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about a holdover GPU, one of the issues that I'd have with buying a 6500 XT as a holdover GPU is the resale value of the card.
It's going to be terrible
when prices become normal. Because if you buy a 3050 for $500 and then prices become normal, they're sold for about $300. Again, you're losing a bunch of money, but it's, you know.
But you got a way better product in the meantime. It's hard to put a value on that.
Yeah, the resale value is still higher at the end, whereas the 6500 XT could very easily tank to being a $150, $100 GPU.
100 easy, yeah.
So you could easily lose half the card's value, and that's going to be an issue for you if you were, you know, you spent $250, then you need to spend $250 again to buy, you know, a better card.
But the answer is, if you want a holdover GPU, I mean, you don't look at it. You don't look at either of those products. You don't look new.
Yeah, you go to the used market, you buy the dirt cheapest.
Like RX 580 back there. Yeah, you go
buy an RX 470 4GB or GT 1030.
And honestly, that will tie you over just as
Yeah.
well as the 6500 XT. So
yeah, I think especially if you're buying a holdover GPU to then buy another entry level to mainstream GPU, I think, you know, a holdover GPU to then spend $700, $500 or whatever, you know, maybe buying a slightly better holdover GPU. Not that I'm saying the 6500 XTs, that makes sense. But if you're buying a $200 GPU to then again spend $200 shortly after, it doesn't seem like a sensible decision to me.
No.
Okay, next question is, hi, Tim and Steve. A question for Steve mainly. But with your building skills, have you considered building yourself a silicon fab to compete against TSMC and help drive prices down? Based on what you've shown us with your shed and house, it seems you'd be more than capable of adding just a few extra steps in.
Does it mean like silicone or silicon? I use a lot of silicone when I build, so I can do lots with that. Yeah, it's probably above my pay grade, I'll be honest.
Well, you know, our YouTube business is going pretty well.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we've made, you know, the $10 to $20 billion it costs for one of those ASML machines.
We've definitely put a small dent in it. So
we can put down a fraction of a deposit. That'll cover it.
Yeah, well, if we live long enough, we might actually get the deposit paid off. Yeah, funny question. Moving right along. Do you think NVIDIA will ever build new non-RTX cards again? Is GTX dead forever? I doubt it's dead forever. It was like, you know, is Pentium and Celeron dead forever? And then they came back with entry-level stuff. So I think it'll be reserved for the entry-level products. And I think that we will see them again. Just it doesn't make sense to do that now, which is sort of what we've already discussed at length. But I think when the market does recover, we could see the GTX branding make a comeback.
Yeah, I think they're, at least on the laptop side, I think they're still running the MX series. So it's not GTX, it's MX. But those are the like your 10 watt, 25 watt, sort of the very basic entry-level GPUs. And I believe the next gen of those, which is maybe coming out this year, doesn't support ray tracing, so it won't be an RTX card.
Right.
So if those still exist, then potentially they would still exist maybe for other applications as well.
Yep.
But I think that the vast majority of consumer desktop cards are going to be RTX cards, especially with the 3050 is now ray tracing capable. They've still got GA107 to deploy if they want to, which is also ray tracing capable. So that's the majority of the lineup. Maybe GA108 would cut out that, or they'd just go back to an old design or something for low-end cards. So I think the majority would be, ray tracing capable. And again, what we've seen with AMD is that their new APUs support ray tracing with RDNA 2 in them. So I guess it just depends like how much space do the ray tracing cores take up. If they wanted to cut those out to make a really budget entry-level system, they might be able to save a bit of space.
Yeah, they don't even necessarily have... There's no rules in what's an RTX and what's a GTX, really. It's just...
Yeah, exactly.
Anything's possible. So, the RX 6500 XT is limited to PCIe 4.0 x 4. They also lack some video encode support and have fewer display outputs compared to other cards. Presumably, this cuts manufacturing costs, and we can only hope savings are passed on. If there has to be cost cutting, what would be acceptable / not acceptable or preferred over something else?
It's an interesting question. Like, what features would you cut out of a GPU first? I think something, you wouldn't go down to PCIe times 4, but certainly going from times 16 to times 8, I don't know how much you'd save there.
Yeah.
But that's probably one of the first things that...
I still don't really like that, but okay.
Yeah. Like, what else are you going to cut out, though?
Yeah, I guess if it's a really entry-level card.
Yeah, if we're talking about entry-level cards, you don't want to cut out CUDA cores or shader units or whatever. So you want to keep the performance the same. Again, would you cut out something like that? Like, again, you wouldn't want to cut out encoding support because that's a very key feature. Again, do you cut like VRAM? Would you cut from like 8 gig to 4 gig? Surely you'd cut the PCIe from times 16 to times 8 before you cut VRAM from 8 to 4 gig.
Sure.
And surely you would cut that before cutting out encoder support, for example, or just display outputs or whatever. So there's not a lot you can really cut that...
I mean, at the end of the day, none of that matters too much. It's what I said earlier. It's about, regardless of what you cut or don't cut, as long as the product that you end up with is unquestionably better than the product you had on the market 5 years ago,
Yes.
it probably doesn't matter too much as long as it competes well with its direct competition in the current market.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's sort of that really. Like, if it was if it only had 4 lanes and 4 gigabytes of VRAM, but it was offering like RTX 3050 levels of performance, then who cares? But it's not. So obviously too much was cut. It crippled the product too much. So, I mean, that's sort of the answer. Like, if it cripples the product too much to the point where it can't compete in the current market and 5-year-old products are arguably better, then you've cut too much.
Yeah, if you had an NVIDIA GPU, would you be, like, they've got ray tracing and tensor cores in there, would you cut the PCIe lanes first, or would you cut out, like, ray tracing or DLSS?
Yeah, well, it'd be ray tracing and DLSS you'd be cutting. I think getting rid of those features would be the way to go. Just because by cutting them, it's a bit of a sting losing DLSS, though the quality isn't as good as 1080p anyway. Bit of a sting losing those features for the games that support them, but by heavily reducing the PCIe bandwidth, you're crippling it for all games.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if the choice was times 4 bandwidth or with ray tracing and DLSS versus an acceptable amount of bandwidth without.
Well, 8 or 16, yeah.
Yeah, you definitely want it that way around. But I mean, I wouldn't be wanting to cut out a feature like DLSS if at all possible these days. I would rather look at optimizations in other areas. But again, there's not that much else that goes into a GPU. If we're looking at display engine, media engine, PCIe, and then just the general GPU engine, there's not a lot else that you can cut aside from like making the cooler horrible or, I don't know, what else? You make the packaging bad?
Comes in a brown box with like someone's with a Sharpie written 6500 XT.
But I think the main issue is really going backwards on features. So it might be acceptable for, say, your high-end cards to add in like AV1 decoding support or encoding, which I know they don't do encoding, but say they do, and then your lower tier cards only have the older feature set. Like, that would be fine, but you don't want to have, let's introduce all our new products have got AV1 decoding, and then next generation, actually, no, we've cut that feature out of all of our cards. Like, you don't want that to happen.
Yeah, you can't go backwards, or at least you shouldn't. All right, I think we've got another Tim-related question here. What do you think of DLDSR, and will you actually do a deep dive on it? I've been using it with a 3080 at 1440p, and have noticed a sharper image at a small performance hit.
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of investigating into DLDSR. It's hard not to just immediately say DLSS when you say DLDSR. Yeah, we haven't covered a lot of the sort of the opposite. We've covered a lot of upscaling technologies, but we haven't done a lot of looks into downscaling. So that's kind of, I guess, slowed my look into this. And I guess at the moment, we're very busy doing a lot of other content, but I think Digital Foundry has a pretty good look at it right now. If you did want to get a good overview of what the technology brings to the table, that you can go and watch. So there's that sort of video, and I'd probably just end up duplicating that video effectively in many ways. I watched that video. It's good coverage of it, I think, and it looks like a good feature. Looks like NVIDIA's putting some more of their AI technology into things that make sense and are useful. So it's good to see that progress in that way. But hopefully I'll be able to cover it at some point. But it's a bit of laptop content to get through at the moment. So might be a little while away.
Okay, we'll hit pause there. part 1 in the bag. Great job, Tim, as
Nice.
always. Well done. But yeah, a lot of good questions as usual, and I'm looking forward to cracking on and getting part 2 done. So it's been a good month this month. I mean, yeah, it's been a good month. It's been a good month compared
good
to
releases,
to
yeah.
a lot of previous months that we had last year. Good releases in the sense that the locked Intel stuff was good. Locked Alder Lake CPUs, a lot of really cool parts there. Finally starting to get some affordable LJ 1700 motherboards. Then we got a Radeon GPU that we won't talk about, and we got an RTX 3050, which at the time of filming we don't actually know how much that's going to cost. So could be
see.
good. Probably bad. I don't know. We'll see where the pricing lands on that one, or you guys will know by now. So hopefully it's good. But anyway, that's going to do it. We have Floatplane Patreon. If you want to become a Hardware Unboxed community member, you get access to Discord server for members. Tim's on there always talking about monitors, behind the scenes content, live streams, and Q&As. We do them from time to time. So anyway, a lot of cool stuff there. If you're interested, do check those links out. Cool stuff there. But if not, perfectly fine. And thank you for watching. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your Tim.
See you next time.